Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. It started with the little things, Claire staying late at work, saying she had meetings that ran long or last-minute deadlines she had to meet. At first, I didn't question it. We both worked long hours, and we were juggling a busy household with 2 kids. But as the weeks dragged on, the small changes became harder to ignore. She would come home exhausted, barely speaking more than a few words before collapsing into bed, her phone never leaving her side. I didn't want to believe there was anything wrong, but my gut was telling me something different. One Saturday morning, while I was getting the kids ready for soccer practice, Claire was in the shower. Her phone, usually glued to her hand, was left on the nightstand. I glanced at it, not really thinking about anything in particular, just out of habit. That's when it lit up with a notification, and everything changed. A message from a number I didn't recognize appeared on the screen. "Can't wait to see you again tonight, baby." I froze. I stared at the words, hoping that somehow I had misread them, that maybe it was a joke, or a mistake. But there it was, plain as day. My hands shook as I picked up the phone, and with a sick feeling in my stomach, I opened the message thread. What I saw sent a wave of nausea through me. The messages went back months, filled with intimate details, plans for secret meetings, and photos that made my blood boil. Claire had been seeing someone named Jeremy, a guy from her office. It wasn't just a fling. They were exchanging, "I miss you," and "I need you," like they were in some kind of twisted romance. I dropped the phone back onto the bed like it had burned me. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I had just uncovered. I heard the water shut off in the bathroom, and suddenly, I felt trapped. I needed to get out of there, to get some air, to think. I grabbed my car keys and told the kids we were leaving for practice early. Claire was still in the shower when I slammed the front door behind me. The drive to the soccer field was a blur. My thoughts were racing, and all I could think about was confronting her, demanding answers. But by the time I pulled into the parking lot, my anger had dulled into something more painful, something like betrayal. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? That night, I didn't say anything. Claire came home from her work dinner, smiling like nothing had happened. I watched her, feeling the weight of my secret, the one she didn't know I now carried. I could barely look at her. I wanted to scream, to throw those messages in her face, but I held back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own house. I went through the motions, work, dinners, helping the kids with homework, but inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't stop thinking about those messages. Every time Claire looked at her phone, I wondered if she was texting him. Every time she came home late, I wondered if she had been with him. I started to dig deeper. I checked her phone whenever she left it unattended, but she had become more careful. The messages from Jeremy were gone, erased, but I knew better. She was hiding it from me now. I checked her email, her social media, even her location history on Google Maps. I felt disgusting doing it, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed proof. I needed something that would make it real because a part of me still hoped I was wrong. But I wasn't. One night, while Claire was asleep, I went through her phone again. This time, I found more than just messages. There were hotel reservations, dinner receipts from places she had never mentioned, and pictures of them together, laughing, holding hands, kissing. I wanted to throw up. I closed the phone and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her. She was lying there, peaceful, like she hadn't been betraying me for God knows how long. I wanted to wake her up and scream at her, to shake her until she admitted everything. But instead, I got up, left the room, and spent the rest of the night on the couch. That's when the anger started to grow. I couldn't just confront her without a plan. I had seen enough movies to know how that would go. She would deny it at first, maybe cry, then apologize, and promise it was all a mistake. And I didn't want her excuses. I wanted to make sure she felt the same pain I was feeling. I wanted her to know that she wasn't going to get away with this. So, I began to prepare. Over the next few weeks, I started gathering evidence. I tracked her phone records, looking for calls and texts to Jeremy. I took screenshots of every email, every receipt, every bit of proof that I could find. I talked to a lawyer, started moving money out of our joint account and into a private one. Slowly but surely, I built a case that she wouldn't be able to weasel her way out of. I knew that just confronting her wasn't enough. I needed to hit her where it hurt. And that's when I decided to go after Jeremy, too. It wasn't hard to find out who he was. Claire had mentioned his name a few times in passing, just another colleague, she said, someone she worked with on big projects. But now I knew better. I did some digging, and it turns out Jeremy had a wife and 2 kids of his own. I found his wife's contact information and sent her an anonymous message, giving her everything, pictures, texts, proof of the affair. I wanted her to feel the same shock I had felt, to know that her life had been a lie, just like mine. Then I waited. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. One evening, Claire came home looking pale and shaken. She barely said a word, just retreated to the bedroom. I knew something had happened. The next morning, I checked her phone again and saw the messages between her and Jeremy, panicked, frantic messages about how his wife had found out, how she was threatening to leave him, how their lives were falling apart. It was glorious. And still, I said nothing to Claire. I watched her unravel, knowing that my revenge was just beginning. It all came to a head on a Saturday afternoon. We were at a family barbecue, her parents, my parents, cousins, friends, everyone. I had chosen that moment carefully. I wanted everyone to see what kind of person Claire really was. When the time came, I stood up and tapped my glass for attention. Claire was sitting across from me, smiling and laughing, oblivious to what was coming. I started talking, calmly at first, thanking everyone for coming. Then I turned to her. "You know," I said, my voice louder now, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you all. Something about Claire." Her smile faltered, and she looked at me, confused. "You see, Claire's been having an affair," I said, my voice steady. The air went out of the room. "For almost a year now. With a guy from her office named Jeremy." There was silence. Claire's face went white as the blood drained from it. Her family stared at her in shock, and my parents looked at me, horrified. "Isn't that right, Claire?" I asked, turning to her. She didn't say anything, just sat there, frozen. After the barbecue, Claire refused to come home. She stayed at her friend's house for the next few days, which was exactly what I wanted. I had set everything up perfectly, and now it was time to execute the rest of my plan. The fallout from my little public revelation had been deliciously swift. After I had dropped the bombshell in front of our families, Claire had tried to stammer out some sort of explanation, but there was no way to sugarcoat it. She had been caught red-handed, and the proof was undeniable. Her parents had been in shock, my parents were furious on my behalf, and her friends looked at her like she was a stranger. No one knew how to react. It was awkward, tense, and exactly what I had envisioned. Claire fled the scene in tears, but I didn't follow her. I stayed, letting her disgrace sink in for everyone else. I pretended to be the wounded husband, just trying to hold it together. People came up to me afterward, offering condolences, but all I could think about was how the real fun was just getting started. I went home that night to a quiet, empty house. The kids were staying with my parents for the weekend, and Claire was God knows where. It gave me space to plan the next phase of my revenge. I didn't feel guilt anymore. There was a time when I would have crumbled under the weight of it, but that time had passed. Now, all I felt was a cold determination to see this through to the bitter end. The first thing I did was get in touch with my lawyer. I already had the groundwork laid for the divorce, but now I was ready to push it forward. I wanted Claire out of my life as soon as possible, and I wasn't interested in playing nice. Move quickly, I told my lawyer. I want the house, full custody of the kids, and I want to leave her with as little as possible. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ellen, nodded. It'll be done. With the evidence you've gathered, it's not going to be hard to make this stick. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The thought of leaving Claire with nothing, stripped of everything she had taken for granted, made me feel almost lightheaded. I wasn't just going to hurt her. I was going to destroy her. By midweek, Claire finally returned home. She walked in the door looking like a shadow of the woman I had known. Her eyes were red from crying, and her shoulders sagged under the weight of everything that had happened. She tried to speak to me, but I cut her off. I've already filed for divorce, I said coldly. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. She looked like I had slapped her. Mark, please. There's nothing left to say, I interrupted. You made your choice. You chose him, not me. Now you can live with the consequences. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then closed it again. For a moment, I almost saw a flicker of the Claire I had married, the one who used to smile at me like I was the only person in the world. But that was gone now, and I wasn't about to let nostalgia stop me from what needed to be done. She didn't cry that night, at least not in front of me. She slept in the guest bedroom, and I barely saw her for the next few days. I stayed focused on my preparations, making sure everything was ready for the custody battle, the financial separation, and the inevitable fights that were sure to come. I had no intention of letting Claire walk away with a single thing she didn't deserve. She was about to feel the full weight of her betrayal. Then came the unexpected twist, Jeremy. I hadn't spoken to him directly since the whole thing began, but I kept tabs on him through the PI I'd hired. Jeremy had been struggling after his wife kicked him out, losing his job shortly after that due to his reckless behavior and alcohol problems. He was spiraling, and it was only a matter of time before he hit rock bottom. One evening, as I was reviewing some paperwork for the divorce, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. I need to talk to you, it read. It's important. I sighed, already tired of her attempts to fix the unfixable. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her in the living room. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, looking more composed than she had in days. What do you want, Claire? I asked, arms crossed. She took a deep breath, her eyes full of something I hadn't expected, fear. It's about Jeremy, she began. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. He's been acting strange. Ever since his wife found out, he's been losing control. He's drinking a lot, and he's been showing up at my work, demanding that I leave with him. I felt a surge of anger. The nerve of this guy, destroying his own life and now trying to drag Claire down with him. But I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't my problem. And why should I care? I said, my voice icy. Claire flinched, but she pressed on. He's been calling me non-stop, sending me messages, showing up at the house when I'm not home. I'm scared, Mark. I don't know what he'll do next. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to say she deserved it, she had gotten herself into this mess, and now she was paying the price. But another part of me, the part that still had a shred of humanity left, knew that this was dangerous. Jeremy wasn't just some guy she had been sleeping with. He was unraveling, and that could make him unpredictable. Maybe even violent. Still, I wasn't about to let her off the hook. You should have thought about that before you decided to have an affair, I said, my tone harsh. Now it's your problem. I'm not getting involved. Claire's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But she held it together. I just thought you should know, she whispered. For the kids' sake. That stopped me. The kids. Of course. They were the only reason I hadn't completely walked away from this mess already. I had to protect them, no matter what. And if Jeremy really was unstable, I couldn't let him anywhere near them. "I'll handle it," I said finally. "But this doesn't change anything between us." Claire nodded, her eyes full of relief. "Thank you, Mark." I turned and walked out of the room, my mind already racing with plans. Jeremy was going to regret ever crossing into my life. He thought he could waltz in, wreck my marriage, and get away with it. Not a chance. I had already destroyed his relationship, but now I was going to take it a step further. The next morning, I called the private investigator and asked him to dig deeper into Jeremy's life. I wanted every detail, the debts, the drinking, the people he owed money to. I wanted to know what made him tick and how I could use it to take him down. The investigator agreed to start right away, and within days, I had a mountain of information that painted a bleak picture of Jeremy's life. He was drowning in debt, had been fired from 2 jobs in the past year, and was on the verge of losing his apartment. He had a reputation as a troublemaker, and now, with his affair with Claire out in the open, he had become a pariah in their social circles. Perfect. I took all the information I had gathered and sent it to his former employers, his creditors, and even his family. I wanted to make sure everyone in his life knew just how far he had fallen. It wasn't enough to expose him to his wife, now, I was going to ruin him completely. By the time I was done, Jeremy was living in a cheap motel, barely scraping by, and on the verge of a full breakdown. I had watched him go from a smug, arrogant homewrecker to a broken man with nothing left, and I didn't feel the slightest bit guilty. Claire, on the other hand, had finally realized that her affair with Jeremy had been a colossal mistake. She had seen what kind of man he really was, an unstable, selfish coward who couldn't even keep his life together, let alone offer her any kind of future. She tried to apologize to me, to beg for forgiveness, but I wasn't interested. My heart had hardened, and there was no room for reconciliation. I wasn't done with her yet, though. Claire's attempt at an apology came too late, and as far as I was concerned, it wasn't worth a damn. She could cry all she wanted, but her tears weren't going to undo the months of betrayal, the affair, or the pain she'd caused. Besides, I had more important things to focus on, like making sure Jeremy never recovered from the disaster he created. The investigator's report had painted a picture of a man circling the drain, and I intended to give him that final push over the edge. I spent days crafting anonymous emails to his creditors and former employers, forwarding the evidence of his affair, his drinking problem, and his spiraling behavior. I wanted to make sure that no one in his life would ever trust him again. By the time I was done, Jeremy was more than just a pariah, he was unemployable, destitute, and completely isolated. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't satisfied. I had dismantled his life piece by piece, and yet I still felt like something was missing. That's when I decided it was time to confront him directly. It happened one evening after I'd learned that he was staying at a dingy motel on the outskirts of town. It didn't take much to find out where he was staying. People like Jeremy, when they don't fall quietly. I knew he was there, nursing his wounds and drowning in cheap whiskey. And I knew exactly how to hit him where it hurt. I waited until just after dark, then drove out to the motel. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a couple of rundown cars. I spotted Jeremy's battered old sedan right away, and a surge of anger rushed through me as I pulled up beside it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I got out of the car. My heart was pounding, and my hands were clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't here to beat him senseless, although part of me desperately wanted to. No, this confrontation was going to be about control. I was going to let him know that I owned him now. I walked up to his door and knocked. It took a moment before I heard the shuffling footsteps on the other side. When the door creaked open, Jeremy stood there, looking like a shell of the man I once imagined he was. His face was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, and he reeked of alcohol. He stared at me for a moment, clearly trying to process who I was and why I was standing in front of him. "Mark," he slurred, blinking like he couldn't quite believe it. "Yeah, it's me," I said, stepping forward and forcing him to retreat back into the room. "We need to talk." He didn't protest. He just staggered backward, collapsing onto the edge of the bed, and buried his face in his hands. The room was dimly lit, with the flicker of a TV casting shadows against the peeling wallpaper. The smell of stale cigarettes and booze filled the air, and for a moment, I wondered how anyone could live like this. "What do you want?" Jeremy mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I want you to know what happens next," I said, keeping my tone cold and level. "I want you to understand that this is just the beginning." He looked up at me, his face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "You ruined my marriage," I said, stepping closer to him. "You thought you could just sleep with my wife, destroy my family, and walk away from it all without consequences. But you're wrong. You're never going to recover from this, Jeremy. I've made sure of it." He stared at me, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. I could see the gears turning in his alcohol-fogged brain as he started to understand what I was saying. "I sent everything to your former employers," I continued. "The drinking, the gambling, the affair, everything. No one is going to hire you again. You're finished in this town, and soon enough, you'll be finished everywhere." "You, what?" His voice cracked as he tried to comprehend what I was telling him. "Why are you doing this?" "Why?" I laughed bitterly. "You're seriously asking me why? You took everything from me, Jeremy. You thought you could have my wife, that you could just step into my life and take what wasn't yours. But now? Now, you've got nothing." He slumped forward, his hands gripping his hair in frustration. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I swear, man. I just got caught up in it." "You got caught up in it?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think that excuses what you did? You think you can just apologize, and it'll make things right?" He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't know, man. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." His apology fell flat, meaningless in the face of the destruction he had caused. But I wasn't here for an apology. I was here to watch him break, and I could already see the cracks forming. "It's too late for sorry," I said, my voice low and threatening. "You're going to live with this for the rest of your life. And every time you try to get back on your feet, every time you think you can rebuild, I'll be there to knock you back down." Jeremy's face contorted with pain as he tried to hold back his tears. "Please, Mark. I've lost everything. My wife, my job. I don't even have a home anymore. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to disappear," I said coldly. "I want you out of this town, out of my life, and out of Claire's life. If I ever see you again, I'll make sure you regret it. Do you understand?" He nodded weakly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'll leave. I swear, I'll leave. Just, please. Don't do anything else. I can't take it anymore." I stood there for a moment, staring down at the man who had once thought he could take everything from me. Now, he was nothing but a broken, pathetic mess. It should have made me feel victorious, but as I looked at him, all I felt was a hollow emptiness. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. It hadn't filled the void that Claire's betrayal had left behind. I turned to leave, not saying another word. As I walked out of the motel and into the cool night air, I realized that I didn't feel better. I had destroyed Jeremy, just as I had planned, but the pain of what had happened still lingered, gnawing at me like a wound that refused to heal. The next few days passed in a blur. Claire continued to stay in the guest room, avoiding me as much as possible. We communicated only about the kids, and even those conversations were short and clipped. She knew I was still moving forward with the divorce, and although she had stopped trying to apologize, I could see the weight of it all crushing her. She had tried to reach out to Jeremy, but he had left town without a word. I had made sure of that. One evening, as I was sitting alone in the living room, sipping a glass of whiskey, Claire finally broke the silence. She stood in the doorway, looking fragile, like she might shatter if I said the wrong thing. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. I looked up at her, waiting for her to continue. I've been looking for an apartment," she went on, her voice shaky. "I'll be moving out next week. I think it's best for everyone." I didn't respond right away. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me, one I didn't want to admit existed, felt a pang of sadness. Our marriage was truly over. There was no going back. "Good," I said finally, my voice emotionless. "That's probably for the best." She nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Mark. I know that doesn't mean much, but I really am." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my glass of whiskey and the shards of our broken life scattered around me. The day Claire moved out was eerily quiet. The kids were at my parents' house for the weekend, and the house felt emptier than ever. Claire hadn't brought much with her. She had packed only a few suitcases, leaving most of the furniture and shared belongings behind. She didn't argue about anything, didn't ask for more than what was necessary. It was as if she had accepted her fate, resigned to the fact that this was the end of everything we had built together. I watched her load the last of her things into her car. She stood by the driver's door for a moment, glancing back at the house, her eyes lingering on it like she was trying to capture one final memory before it all faded away. "I'll bring the kids by on Sunday," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I had planned to feel triumphant in this moment. After everything I'd done to bring her and Jeremy down, this should have been the final victory. But instead, I felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of loss. Not just the loss of Claire, but the loss of everything we'd shared, the life, the love, the memories, the dreams we once had. "Goodbye, Mark," she said softly, her eyes full of regret. Without waiting for a response, she got into her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the driveway. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight of what had happened pressed down on me like a crushing burden. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Not like this. I went inside, shutting the door behind me. The silence was suffocating. The house that had once been full of laughter, arguments, and life now felt like a tomb. I poured myself another drink, hoping the alcohol would dull the ache in my chest, but it only made the emptiness more pronounced. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I had spent so much time focused on revenge, on destroying Claire and Jeremy, that I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. I had won, hadn't I? Jeremy was gone, Claire was broken, and I had the house, the kids, and the upper hand in the divorce. But sitting there in the dark, I realized that I hadn't won anything. I had destroyed my own life in the process. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions, working, picking up the kids, pretending everything was fine. But the truth was, I felt like I was unraveling. Every time I walked into a room, I could feel Claire's absence like a physical presence. The ghost of her laughter echoed through the house, and I found myself remembering the good times, the times before everything had gone so horribly wrong. One evening, about a week after Claire had moved out, I received a call. It was late, and I was half asleep on the couch, the TV flickering in the background. I almost didn't answer, but something in me told me to pick up. "Mark?" It was Claire's voice, but it sounded wrong, shaky, terrified. My heart skipped a beat. "Claire. What's going on?" I asked, sitting up, the tension in her voice sending a chill down my spine. I need help, she stammered, her voice cracking. I think someone's following me. What? I shot up from the couch, adrenaline coursing through me. Where are you? I'm driving home, she said, her breath coming in short gasps. I left work late, and there's this car, it's been behind me for miles. I've tried turning off, but it keeps following me. I don't know what to do. Panic seized me. Claire, listen to me. Drive to the police station, don't go home. Just get somewhere safe. I'm trying, she whispered, her voice full of fear. Her words cut off suddenly, replaced by the sound of screeching tires and a crash. Then, silence. Claire. I shouted into the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Claire. Are you there? Nothing. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, dialing her number again as I raced to my car. It went straight to voicemail. My hands were shaking as I drove, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Who had been following her? Why had this happened now? Was it Jeremy? Had he come back, angry and unstable? Or was it someone else, some danger I hadn't seen coming? I didn't even know where she had been when she called me. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, calling her again and again, praying she would answer. But she never did. The next morning, I received the call that shattered everything. It was the police. Claire had been found on a deserted road outside of town. Her car had been forced off the road, crashing into a tree. She was dead by the time they reached her. I dropped the phone, the words sinking into me like knives. Claire was gone. Just like that. The woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, the woman I had spent years of my life with, dead. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My world had collapsed around me, and there was nothing left but darkness. The police didn't know who had done it. There was no sign of the car that had been following her. No clues, no answers. Just an open investigation and the endless void of not knowing. I spent the next few days in a state of numb disbelief, barely able to function. The kids didn't understand. They cried, asking where mommy was, and I had no words to comfort them. How could I tell them that their mother was gone, that she had died scared and alone, with no one to help her? The funeral was unbearable. I stood there, surrounded by family and friends, but all I could think about was how this had all gone so horribly wrong. I had wanted revenge. I had wanted Claire to pay for what she had done, but I had never wanted this. I had never wanted her to die. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces, but there was no escaping the guilt that gnawed at me. I had pushed her away. I had destroyed her life. Maybe if I had forgiven her, maybe if I had been willing to work through our problems, she would still be alive. But I hadn't. I had let my anger consume me, and now Claire was gone forever. And the worst part? I would never know who had been following her. I would never know if it had been Jeremy, coming back to finish what he had started, or some random predator. The not knowing was a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. In the end, there was no victory. No sense of satisfaction. Just an endless, aching void where my family used to be. I had sought revenge, but all I had found was loss. A loss so deep, so profound, that I wasn't sure I would ever recover. I had destroyed everything, and now, there was nothing left to rebuild.